The Old Republic was the Republic of legend, greater than distance or time. No need to note where it was or whence it came, only to know that it was the Republic. Once, under the wise rule of the Senate and the protection of the Jedi Knights, the Republic throve and grew. But as often happens when wealth and power pass beyond the admirable and attain the awesome, then appear those evil ones who have greed to match. So it was with the Republic at its height. Like the greatest of trees able to withstand any external attack, the Republic rotted from within, though the danger was not visible from outside. Aided and abetted by restless, power-hungry individuals within the government and the massive organs of commerce, the ambitious Senator Palpatine caused himself to be elected Chancellor of the Republic. He promised to reunite the disaffected among the people, and to restore the remembered glory of the Republic. Once secure in office, he declared himself Emperor, shutting himself away from the populace. Having exterminated through treachery and deception the Jedi Knights, guardians of justice in the galaxy, the Imperial governors and bureaucrats prepared to institute a reign of terror among the disheartened worlds of the galaxy. Many used the Imperial forces and the name of the increasingly isolated Emperor to further their own personal ambitions. But a small number of systems rebelled at these new outrages. Declaring themselves opposed to the New Order, they began the great battle to restore the Old Republic. What do you see when you imagine the rise of the Galactic Empire? Do you see the destruction of the Jedi Order? Do you see the fall of Anakin Skywalker? Do you see the betrayal of the clone troopers? Do you see the darkness fast approaching to cover the entire galaxy? You probably do. After all, you know how this story ends. But those who lived in it didn't. Just like us, they knew only the past and present, while the future was ever uncertain. So let us put ourselves into the boots of a common man in the waning days of the Old Republic. The Clone Wars have been raging for 3 years. The galaxy is divided. Billions, if not trillions, have been killed. Corruption is rampant, and most senators are only interested in lining their own pockets. The Jedi Order, already veiled in secrecy, now seems only to care for its own self-interest. It appears that the only one left to look after the people is the Supreme Chancellor, Sheev Palpatine. He is more than respected. He is loved. He is the galaxy's last hope. And then, catastrophe. It's all relayed on the HoloNet. The Jedi have made an attempt on the Chancellor's life. Retaliation was swift. The Grand Temple on Coruscant is in flames, and the smoke rising into the night sky punctuates a new reality, that all Jedi have been branded as traitors. It's everything that people feared come true. The Guardians of Justice have fallen from the light, the last defenders of the Republic have turned, and now nothing stands in the way of complete chaos. Nothing, that is, except Palpatine, scarred by the attempt but still strong. But now, his speech seems to take a turn.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society.
As the Senate building erupts into applause and cheers for the end of the very republic that it stands for, countless beings across the galaxy begin to do the same. The Republic had failed long ago. It had become a weak, shiftless oligarchy, and the only thing left holding it together was Palpatine. He had made it an empire in fact, but now it would become an empire in name as well. And who better to spearhead the new regime than the most admired man in the galaxy? The day the Empire rose was the same day that the Clone Wars came to an end. It seemed auspicious, a sign that things might finally start to get better. The Republic had prided itself on its ideals of liberty and democracy, but for as long as anyone could remember, these lofty principles only ever meant a blank check for the wealthy and powerful to plunder at will, while the impoverished masses suffered and fought over the scraps. With this reordering of galactic government and society, it seemed like a new day was dawning. The war was over. The Separatists had been broken, their leaders dead or on the run, and the insurrection of the conniving Jedi had been foiled. The corrupt senators and oligarchs who had crippled the Republic would now surrender to a greater power, and under the benevolent rule of Emperor Palpatine, many saw their lives genuinely improve. Reparations from the war and growing Imperial industry saw a massive new wave of employment as ravaged worlds were revitalized. Crime was cracked down upon, and the stability that Palpatine had promised was becoming a reality. For trillions of people, life had never been better. Though, in truth, the conflict wasn't fully over. The Confederacy of Independent Systems was shattered, but not completely destroyed. Numerous separatist holdouts across the Outer Rim tried to maintain their independence, leaving the first years of the Empire to be marked by a swift reconquest of these errant star systems. But this wasn't the Clone Wars. Not anymore, and in no small part because the clones themselves were being replaced. Under the secret Project Warmantle, headed up by one Vice Admiral Edmund Rampart, the ranks of the Imperial Army would begin to be filled out with conscripted soldiers. The clones had served a purpose, and at least for the time being, would continue serving it, but where the Republic had required an elite fighting force to combat a conventional military, the Empire needed to maintain the order that those men had fought to create. Recruited soldiers, though less skilled than the genetically engineered clones, could be far greater in numbers, and had far more tangible reasons to be loyal.
With the Empire, I get paid, I get fed, and I have a roof over my head. That's more than the Republic ever did for me.
Project Warmantle wasn't Rampart's only initiative, though. Just days after the rise of the Empire, ships began to be impounded on worlds across the galaxy, and citizens of the new regime suddenly found themselves in need of something called a chain code.
My what?
Your chain code.
Every citizen can exchange their invalid currency for Imperial credits, thanks to the generosity of the new Galactic Empire. The war is over. With peace comes opportunity and prosperity for all.
Chain codes were identifying markers that contained biometric information on an individual. Through their use, the Empire was able to start building a database of its citizens, allowing them to track down anyone in the galaxy if needed. And these codes weren't exactly optional either. Any kind of space travel would now also require the use of a chain code.
I booked passage on this transport,
No planetary travel without a chain code.
but I have to get on this ship!
Stand down, citizen. Get in line. Get your chain code, and don't make any trouble. It's not just ships. They're registering people, too.
Ostensibly, the goal of the chain code policy was to help with law enforcement. Before and during the Clone Wars, piracy had run rampant, and restricting travel in this way would make it much more difficult for pirates to operate. But even those who had welcomed the Empire at first knew on some level that the real purpose behind the implementation of chain codes was control. By making the possession of a chain code a condition for freedom of movement, most beings in the galaxy had no choice but to get one. The price for their security would be their liberty. Such was the way of the Empire, and for many of its inhabitants, that was a worthwhile trade. After years of war and decades of instability, perhaps it was worth exchanging some meager freedoms for peace of mind. But even as the Empire asserted greater authority in the name of safety, many of its citizens only found themselves in more danger. A key element of Palpatine's New Order was the ideology of human supremacism. Humans were by far the most numerous sentient species in the galaxy, and had long controlled many institutions of central government. Part of the reason that so many planets broke from the Republic in the first place was because many alien species felt underrepresented and underserved. With the rise of the Empire, this tension only worsened. The doctrine of human supremacism meant that aliens were reduced to second-class citizens, and even those alien worlds which had remained loyal during the war were treated with scrutiny and suspicion. One system in particular would prove to be a prelude of things yet to come: Ryloth. During the Clone Wars, Ryloth had been subjected to a brutal separatist occupation, which was only driven off when the local Twi'lek resistance movement of renowned freedom fighter Cham Syndulla joined with the Republic Relief Army to take the planetary capital. Syndulla, for his part, had been reluctant to accept Republic help, and only did so under the condition that their troops would leave at the end of the war. Only that didn't happen. The end of the war saw the arrival of even more troops, as well as the opening of an Imperial refinery on the planet, while the Twi'leks were required to turn over their weapons. One occupier had been replaced by another. For many of Cham's fighters, this was unacceptable, and though he initially tried to make peace with their new rulers, he soon enough found himself in a prison cell. As the freedom fighters attempted their escape from Imperial captivity, they found an unexpected ally in clone Captain Hauser. Hauser had fought in the Ryloth campaign, growing close with the Twi'leks over the years, and despite both his orders and his training, he couldn't help the feeling that what the Empire was doing was wrong.
Brothers, what are we doing? We came here to free Ryloth from separatist control, and we succeeded. But look around you. We're now being ordered to target the very people we swore to protect, and I will not be a part of it any longer. Who will stand with me?
The mutiny of Clone Captain Hauser and his men would not be remembered by many. It would not be a pivotal turning point in galactic history or the start of a grand revolution by the clone army. But it was a powerful statement, one that would, in time, be echoed with mounting frequency and volume as the Empire's facade continued to slip. But that time was still far away, and in this moment, Hauser was just another traitor threatening Imperial order. He wasn't the only one either. Up until this point, the clones had been kept in line with inhibitor chips implanted in their brains from before they were born to make them more compliant to orders. This was how they were compelled to execute their Jedi generals without hesitation. But in the aftermath of the Jedi Purge, these chips started to fail, and as they slowly regained their individuality, a growing number of clones began questioning the new order they'd helped to bring about. They were soldiers of a republic that no longer existed, and in the Empire, many found themselves out of place. Hauser was neither the first nor the last to defect. From regular troopers at the bottom to captains and commanders at the top, a growing number of clones were deserting from the army, and it was becoming clear that they were incompatible with the new regime. That's why Project Warmantle was started in the first place. That's why the cloning facilities on Kamino were shut down. That's why the Kaminoan scientists who created the clones were arrested and taken off-world. And in the end, that's why Kamino itself was destroyed.
Sir, we're in position.
Open fire.
The public was told that Kamino's cities were destroyed in a catastrophic storm. The bombing was covered up. This was a calculated move. Without the capacity to produce new clone troopers, the Empire was vulnerable. It needed new soldiers. And right on cue, in stepped Vice Admiral Rampart, proposing legislation to the Imperial Senate that would formalize the transition from clones to civilian recruits. But the bill met stiff opposition, with concerns ranging from cost to living conditions for decommissioned clone troopers. Finally, just as the vote was about to commence, irrefutable evidence of the attack on Kamino was presented to the full Senate. With this revelation, Rampart's defense recruitment bill seemed to have failed, its very foundation exposed as a lie, and Rampart himself exposed as an apparent traitor. The Senate was in an uproar. But then, rising out of the floor like a demon from the underworld, Emperor Palpatine took the stage. He'd been absent from the initial debate sessions surrounding the bill, but he was always watching, always listening. Palpatine had pulled the strings since before his election to the chancellorship, all those years ago, and he was still pulling the strings now. Just as he'd been responsible for the creation of the clone army, so too would he be responsible for its end.
Many lives have been lost, but I assure you, Admiral Rampart will face the consequences for his treachery. However, he did not act alone. The fact that the clones under his command so blindly followed orders, inflicting such carnage without hesitation, gives me pause. Perhaps it is time for a change. Now, more than ever, building a strong galaxy requires protection and security. Due to the nefarious actions of Admiral Rampart and the immediacy of the bill on the floor today, it is my opinion that this legislation is our future. With this momentous act, we shall usher in a new era, heralded by the Imperial stormtrooper.
With the formal inauguration of the new Imperial military, the days of the Old Republic were well and truly over. The Senate remained, and though it still possessed some power in theory, it had been reduced to a glorified rubber stamp, providing the appearance of democratic legitimacy for unilateral decisions already made by Emperor Palpatine. Regional governors were appointed by the Emperor himself to run entire sectors, usurping what little hypothetical authority the Senate had left. Since before its official formation, the real power in the Galactic Empire was the military. But a government by the military is still a government, and inevitably faces the same internal divisions and power struggles of any ruling institution. Several months after the rise of the Empire, a rogue unit known as Clone Force 99 attempted to steal from the war chest of Count Dooku, former head of state of the Separatist Alliance. The heist failed, and two of the unit's members were identified by Clone Captain Wilco, who was charged with protecting this treasure. Clone Force 99 had been assumed dead in the fall of Kamino, so Wilco's report of their survival directly contradicted Admiral Rampart's narrative. His position under threat, the Admiral took matters into his own hands.
If Governor Tarkin were to learn of my misstep, then I would be at risk. And that cannot happen. Which is why a new report will be submitted. one void of any mention of Clone Force 99.
Sir, I will not falsify an official report.
I understand. I will.
Vice Admiral Rampart had always been corrupt. He sought to increase his own power and standing at any cost, even if it meant undermining the interests of the very empire he was supposed to serve. And yet, when he was arrested, it had nothing to do with this blatant act of treachery, which was ignored and forgotten about. Captain Wilco was an honest and dutiful soldier, while Rampart was a scheming and conniving politician. Yet Wilco's integrity got him killed, while Rampart's deceitfulness got him promotions. This kind of incompetence was not an outlier or a detriment, but rather a key component of the Imperial system, where officers of the Republic had been tasked with serving the people and were rewarded for displaying honor and courage. Officers of the Empire were tasked only with serving the Emperor and were rewarded for their avarice and cruelty. In the authoritarian state that was the Empire, where force and coercion were the primary instruments of rule, Imperial officers were encouraged to be selfish, to be ruthless, to give no quarter even to their allies. The only real way to climb the Imperial hierarchy was over the bodies of men like Captain Wilco. Many more would meet a similar fate as the new military was being established. Clone troopers, who were already in the process of being decommissioned, were easy for up-and-coming Imperial officers to exploit for their own gain. They would be used, then simply left to die once their usefulness expired. To put it in the words of one officer, they were expendable. But the truth is that in the Empire, everyone was expendable. All of them were just cogs in a machine, liable to be thrown away at any time. Before his arrest, Rampart had been the face of new Imperial policies, leading the charge for the New Order. But as soon as he became an inconvenience, he too was cast aside without a second thought. The same would prove true for entire branches of the Empire, all squabbling and sabotaging one another, just like the people within them. Not long after the Great Purge, Emperor Palpatine formed an organization of captive ex-Jedi to be known as Inquisitors. These Inquisitors were meant to hunt down any survivors of the Purge, under the leadership of the Emperor's right-hand man, Darth Vader. In its early years, the Inquisitorius was a powerful and feared institution, able to act with near impunity in their mission. But with time, as the number of surviving Jedi dwindled and the ranks of the Inquisitors began to deplete, so too did their power and influence start to wane. Before long, they found themselves forced into competition with a rising organization called the Imperial Security Bureau, or ISB. 10 years after the rise of the Empire, ISB supervisor Lank Denvik would take it upon himself to find and destroy a group of survivors on the planet Jedha, only for his operative Bode Akuna to betray him and turn the location of the Jedi base over to the Inquisitorius. As it turned out, they had known nothing of the planned operation, because Denvik had deliberately tried to hide it from them.
Bode has been my weapon for some time. Quite effective. Unlike those armored abominations in the Inquisitorius.
So it's true. Seer's dead because of you.
No. The Jedi operation is still months away.
You're lying. The Empire burned the archives, led by Darth Vader.
Lord Vader. I have to stop this while I still can! Don't you see? Bode lured you here to destroy me! They're coming! Dead man,
Denvik would soon be proven right, as Vader himself paid a final visit to deal with this flagrant treason. And yet, all the same, the Inquisitorius would be gone completely within just another decade, the ISB taking its place. This is the nature of autocratic regimes like the Empire. Authoritarianism requires internal discord within its bureaucracy and conflict between its agencies and officers. It's not a flaw, it's a feature. Autocracies are based on hierarchy and subservience, and they maintain themselves through fear. That's not to say that a dictator can't rise to power through democratic means, because most, including Palpatine himself, have done so in just that way. But once they've gained absolute power, there are no checks or balances holding them accountable, and no more popular sovereignty to speak of. The dictator can only keep his position through force. Now, with overt violence having become a legitimate tool of government, there's nothing stopping an ambitious general or admiral from raising his own army to seize control. So, in order to prevent this, any intelligent dictator has to set up his regime in such a way that the officials he installs can never amass enough power to challenge him. By giving those officials overlapping responsibilities, the dictator fosters competition and rivalry, thereby elevating himself as the final arbiter of any dispute. Palpatine used these tactics to become Emperor in the first place, exploiting the rifts formed during the Separatist Crisis and Clone Wars to justify the concentration of ever more power in himself. And after securing his throne, he continued to use those very same tactics to keep his power. Beyond dividing his own military, Palpatine pushed further to divide the entire galaxy along lines of Separatist and Loyalist, and just as the Republic became the Empire, the remnants of the Confederacy would become the Empire's earliest opposition. In a certain sense, the Separatists had been fighting the Empire since before its creation. Many systems in the Outer Rim saw the Republic as a corrupt and tyrannical enterprise, ruled by a wealthy core world elite that neglected their needs and exploited their resources. As it became clear that meaningful reform was impossible, some of these systems chose to peacefully secede and form their own government, one where their voices would finally be heard. So was born the Separatist Parliament. Now, it's important to understand that the Separatist movement and the Confederacy of Independent Systems were not the same thing. The Confederacy came to be ruled by the same corporate interests and petty autocrats who had corroded the Republic, and this allowed Republic propaganda to paint all Separatists as bloodthirsty warmongers. But the Separatist movement both preceded and outlived the Confederacy. Far from warmongering, they were motivated by a passionate desire for the very liberty and democracy that the Republic had failed to give them. To a Separatist, the Clone Wars were not about subjugation of the enemy, but instead about their own freedom. Where the Republic sought to reincorporate Separatist territories by force and re-establish their hegemony over the galaxy, the Separatists only wanted recognition of their independence and the right for other systems to secede peacefully. But the Republic, whose institutions had come to rely on the exploitation of the Rim and supremacy of the core, couldn't have that. They were an imperial state long before they had an emperor, and the Separatists were among the first to rebel against that imperialism. They would not be the last. This is the Galactic Empire. When all the propaganda is stripped away, when the initial euphoria passes, when the pomp and circumstance and the grandeur of Imperium is replaced with cold, hard reality, the New Order shows itself for what it really is. A government by fear, maintained through violence and corruption, ruled by a self-appointed emperor who uses the pretense of peace and security to justify terror and tyranny. Though there remained many galactic citizens who held genuine loyalty to an empire they saw as bringing order, where once there was chaos, many more would eventually find that the men they'd hailed as their saviors had become their oppressors. They found themselves in a prison of their own making. Their apathy, which had allowed the Republic to rot from the inside out, provided fertile ground for the new Imperial machine to take root. But not everyone was paralyzed in this way. You may rule a nation by force. It may be grand and powerful, stretching to the furthest corners of the galaxy. But the one thing the Empire, the Inquisitorius, and even the ISB could never fully control, is people's minds. They could manipulate, they could indoctrinate, they could suppress, but they could not truly gain dominion over their citizens' thoughts. Scattered across the galaxy, there remained those few who believed, those who remembered liberty and desired its return. At first, it was only an idea, one of those many inconvenient notions that the police state existed to subdue. But as the Empire continued to strip away the freedoms that so many had once enjoyed, that idea would burn brighter and brighter, threatening to cast away the shadow of the Empire in a glittering inferno. All it would take is one spark, one act of defiance to bring about a reckoning that would shatter the facade and light the torch of revolution. What makes a rebel? What causes someone to relinquish comfort and stability and throw themselves into a fight from which they may never emerge? By nature, most people will always seek the path of least resistance. Inaction is easy. Action is not, and the Empire understood this. Their entire military was built around precisely this fact.
The average citizen has no grasp of numbers nor a head for calculation. I maintain that the effectiveness of the Star Destroyer stems not only from its massive firepower, but from its size. When citizens look at a Star Destroyer and then compare it to the craft which might be mustered to attack it, they have a tendency to dismiss such a notion as suicidal rather than approach the problem tactically. This natural state can be exploited to a far greater degree as the average citizen deals in symbols, not rational analysis.
However, not everyone was fooled by the Empire's illusion of power. Some, who had no other choice, fought despite the odds, only to discover just how fragile that power could be. Perhaps the very first of these men was Saw Gerrera. Long before any mutterings of dissent against the Empire, before even the Empire itself, Gerrera had made a name for himself as a freedom fighter. At first helping to drive off the separatist occupation of his homeworld during the Clone Wars, Saw and his militia were branded as insurgents when they refused to bow to the new regime. Renaming themselves the Partisans, they embarked on a broad campaign of guerrilla warfare against the Empire, striking wherever the opportunity presented itself. He was perhaps the original rebel, but for most of the almost 2 decades that the Partisans fought, they fought alone. Their staunch radicalism and intransigence alienated them from other nascent rebel groups and only gave the Empire an excuse to tighten their grip. But that Imperial instinct to respond to force with more force was a weakness, one that could be exploited. For the complacent citizens of the galaxy to finally take up arms, they would need to be pushed. Inaction would have to become more painful than action.
The Empire has been choking us so slowly we're starting not to notice. The time has come to force their hand.
People will suffer.
That's the plan.
Enter Luthen Rael. By day, the friendly owner of a high-end antique shop in the upper levels of Coruscant. By night, a shadowy revolutionary leader known to the Imperial Security Bureau only as Axis. Using funds covertly passed over from the private wealth of Senator Mon Mothma, Rael worked in secret to create a network of spies, saboteurs, and insurgents. All over the galaxy, from the depths of the Rim to the upper echelons of the Empire itself, he formed connections and cultivated contacts that he could call upon as needed. And at last, 14 years after the birth of the New Order, the time to strike finally arrived.
5 days.
Big stakes, big danger. Prep team, good plan. You survive and deliver. I'll give you 200,000.
What would we be stealing?
The quarterly payroll for an entire Imperial site.
On the backwater world of Aldhani, a team comprised of 6 volunteers and 1 mercenary, Cassian Andor, plotted to infiltrate the Imperial headquarters on the planet and steal the hundreds of millions of credits contained there. Months of research, of reconnaissance, of planning and preparation culminated in one mission that would exploit all the built-in weaknesses of the Empire, helping to spread the cracks while also providing vital funding for Ryle's operation. Against all odds, the heist proved a success, though 2 of the infiltrators were killed in a firefight, and one, the young political idealist Karis Nemik, was gravely injured. One of his last dying wishes was that Andor be gifted his unfinished manifesto, but while the survivors mourned their dead and celebrated their victory, the news of the attack trickled its way back to Coruscant.
The criminals responsible for last night's atrocity on Aldhani think they've taken the Empire by surprise. We know better. We know the real shock will be when they discover how ready and eager we are to respond, to be prepared. Be here this morning and know that the only question we need to answer is how tight to close our fist.
Fundamentally, tyranny has only one tool. In absence of civil government, the only way to keep the peace and maintain order is through the barrel of a gun. Ideally, with a docile populace, this one tool rarely has to be used. However, facing an attack like Aldhani, the Empire could conceive no other alternative than to lash out with overwhelming force. This is why Luthen poured so much time and effort into the heist, why he risked revealing himself to the Empire just to bring Cassian on board. Certainly, the money would help in organizing future operations, but that was just a bonus. The real purpose of Aldhani was to prompt a crackdown.
The following measures will be adopted empire-wide as of today. A tribute tax equal to 5 times the amount stolen from Aldhani will be levied on any sector harboring partisan activity. We will make it clear that no one steals from the Empire. The use of any local custom, festival, or tradition as cover for rebel activity will trigger permanent revocation of Imperial tolerance.
We will be invoking the Public Order Resentencing Directive later today. PORD.
Any criminal act with even indirect effect on the Empire will henceforth be branded a Class 1 offense.
All prison sentences are immediately re-evaluated. All outstanding fines and levies are to be paid in full.
Until this point, most citizens of the Empire were able to get by and live comfortably so long as they kept their heads down. With the advent of the PORD, all that changed overnight. You could be arrested just on suspicion of anti-Imperial activity, then, under the new guidelines, be sentenced to years in prison. Simply staying out of the Empire's way was no longer enough. Now, you had to take a side. But the Public Order Decree wasn't the only retaliatory measure taken for Aldhani. At the behest of the Emperor himself, the Senate passed the Imperial Emergency Act, securing the ascendance of the ISB. Beyond allowing agents to appropriate army and naval resources as needed, it notably expanded the reach of ISB supervisors, permitting them to access data from outside their own sectors and supersede any local governments they may have to work with. What had begun as a simple intelligence agency was now the Empire's de facto secret police, in many ways more powerful than the military. But there's a reason you separate the military and the police. One fights the enemies of the state, the other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, the enemies of the state tend to become the people. And when the government starts to treat its own citizens as the enemy, they eventually start to reciprocate. The people begin to see that the military isn't there to keep them safe from any external threat, but rather is meant to protect the people in power from those they oppress. What Luthen helped to do with the Aldhani raid was draw battle lines that more and more people found themselves on the wrong side of. It would start on Ferrix, Cassian Andor's home world. The planet's Imperial puppet government had disastrously failed to arrest the fugitive, resulting in the deaths of several corporate security officers. As a result, the local ruling conglomerate was liquidated, and Ferrix was placed under direct rule from Coruscant. Searching for a connection to Axis, the ISB descended on the planet, resorting to brutal and inhumane methods to extract information about Luthen and Cassian. A few months after Aldhani, Marva Andor, Cassian's adoptive mother, succumbed to an illness. The Imperial officers on the planet, having thus far seen no success in their manhunt, saw this as an opportunity to apprehend Cassian, who would surely try to sneak in to attend the funeral. With him, they might finally be able to uncover the identity of Axis. Yet, as the people of Ferrix prepared to lay Marva to rest, the occupation only intensified, and public discontent grew. The Imperial forces on the planet were too busy preparing to catch Andor to notice the revolution brewing right beneath their noses. Slowly but surely, people the galaxy over were being made to see the truth. A truth which one Karis Nemik had written in his manifesto all those months ago.
There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here. It's here, and it's not visiting anymore. It wants to stay. The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep. It's easy for the dead to tell you to fight. And maybe it's true, maybe fighting's useless. Perhaps it's too late. But I'll tell you this. If I could do it again, I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start. Fight the Empire!
As months of pent-up anger boiled over, the funeral procession erupted into chaos. After one of the rioters threw a bomb, The occupying troops began to open fire on the citizens of Ferrix, and what started as an uprising quickly turned into a massacre. Dozens of civilians were slaughtered indiscriminately, and those who were able had to flee the planet, while Cassian, no longer a mercenary, chose to dedicate his life to the rebellion, formally joining Luthen's operation. The revolt on Ferrix did not succeed. It never stood a chance. Though the Imperial garrison was damaged severely, the bloodbath that ensued firmly reasserted their control. But even as smoke rose from Rick's Road and the bodies of the innocent lay in the street, the spark of rebellion hadn't been stamped out. What Luthen helped set into motion could no longer be stopped. Ferrix was just the beginning, the prelude to a new war that was soon to engulf the entire galaxy. But the true start to this war would come far from the brick buildings and scrapyards of Ferrix, on a planet deep in the Outer Rim. On its surface, Lothal was an unremarkable world. Dominated by empty grass plains and tall stone spires, the planet was sparsely populated, far from any major trade routes, and of little interest to the galactic government. However, just below the surface lay a vast bounty of valuable metals and minerals, and after an Imperial survey team discovered these reserves, factories and mining facilities quickly began springing up across the planet to exploit them. The planetary government was sidelined as the capital city was redesigned in Imperial style, and Lothal came to be ruled in all but name by the Imperial military. Like on so many other worlds, those who had initially welcomed the Empire as a stabilizing force began to see it for what it really was, and enthusiastic patriotism soon turned towards bitter, but quiet, discontent. Most people knew what was being done to them, and in their thoughts, they cursed the Empire daily, but few were brave enough to speak out. Those who did were swiftly silenced. In spite of this danger, a group of local insurgents, known as the Spectres, made a plan to commandeer the Imperial Communications Center on the planet, and through it, speak to an audience they knew to be more than willing to hear their message.
We have been called criminals, but we are not. We are rebels, fighting for the people.
Fighting for you.
See what the Empire has done to your lives, your families, and your freedom? It's only gonna get worse. Unless we stand up and fight back. It won't be easy. There will be loss and sacrifice, but we can't back down just because we're afraid. That's when we need to stand the tallest.
Stand up together.
Because that's when we're strongest.
As one.
You do not know what it takes to win a war, but I do.
As the communications tower crumbled, destroyed in order to silence the rebels, Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin took the leader of the Spectres aboard his Star Destroyer for interrogation. By this point in time, Tarkin was one of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy, named Governor of the Outer Rim by the Emperor himself. He wasn't just a representative of Imperial ruthlessness, he literally wrote the rulebook on it. The Imperial military ideology was known as the Tarkin Doctrine. But for all his efforts to suppress whispers of dissent and crush the Spectres, the message that they had fought so hard to send was received all over the Lothal sector, and soon enough, the rest of the galaxy. heard their broadcast, a rebel group known as Phoenix Cell arrived to save the Spectres from certain doom. As Tarkin's prized flagship collapsed in a flaming wreck above Mustafar, a wider rebellion was beginning to form, and celebrated one of its first real victories against the Empire. News of Tarkin's defeat spread quickly and bolstered other cells across the galaxy. Everything began to accelerate exponentially. Grateful for their rescue, the Spectres joined Phoenix Cell, helping to expand their arsenal and grow their manpower. Together, they increasingly coordinated with other rebel cells, supplying them and being supplied by them as they quietly built a broader, galaxy-wide rebel movement. Following an Imperial ambush that drove Phoenix Cell from their hideout on Gorel, Senator Bail Organa sent reinforcements in the form of 3 Hammerhead corvettes to Lothal, shoring up their forces. Yet, without a spaceport in which to dock, Phoenix Squadron found themselves with nowhere to keep their fighters, and started losing pilots faster than they could be replaced. Upon being contacted by Cham Syndulla's resistance on Ryloth, still fighting after 16 years, they saw an opportunity to solve 2 problems at once, by stealing an Imperial carrier orbiting the planet. The more that their fleet grew, though, the more unwanted attention they attracted, and the more difficult it became for them to keep hiding in deep space. The need for a permanent base was mounting by the day. Hunted relentlessly by Imperial forces, Phoenix Cell's nascent insurgency was at risk of being killed in the cradle. Flight, at any cost, seemed to be their only recourse, and just as the Empire closed in, an avenue for escape presented itself.
Transmission coming through! Sato, I have the new coordinates!
Jump!
By a stroke of incredible luck, the beleaguered rebel fleet found refuge on Atollon, a small and isolated planet within the Lothal sector devoid of any Imperial presence. With this new base, somewhere they could finally call home, Phoenix grew rapidly and began preparing a major offensive to free Lothal. To that end, the Spectres undertook a risky mission to steal an entire squadron's worth of Republic-era Y-Wing starfighters. They had been marked for the scrap heap, but were instead transferred to General Jen Dodonna's Masasi group, which was quickly becoming one of the largest rebel cells in the galaxy. Amid the escalating violence, a growing number of Imperials began questioning their loyalty to a government which seemed increasingly willing to use sheer blunt force in its efforts to stamp out the rebellion.
I was flying cargo ships when the Empire recruited me. At the time, I figured, why not? Seemed a whole lot more exciting than hauling spare parts around the galaxy. But if this is what the Empire's becoming, I don't know.
You ever think about getting out?
That's not really possible, is it?
Maybe more possible than you realize.
Seizing on the clear opportunity presented to them, the rebellion began fostering the defections of as many Imperial soldiers and officers as they could manage. Going undercover as a Navy cadet, Spectre operative Sabine Wren, herself a defector, aided in the escape of 2 Maverick TIE fighter pilots from an elite naval academy. One of them, Wedge Antilles, would go on to lead the renowned Rogue Squadron, winning glory in numerous battles against the Empire. Their escape would have been impossible in the first place if not for the assistance of ISB agent Alexander Callis. Though Callis had spent the better part of 3 years hunting the Spectres and Phoenix Cell, he began discreetly feeding information to the rebellion after his illusions of Imperial righteousness were shattered. On Callis's intelligence, a group of rebels infiltrated the Imperial Armory complex on Lothal to steal plans for a new top-secret weapon being developed there. When the factory went on lockdown and the infiltrators found themselves trapped, it was Callis who stepped in to help them escape, allowing them to bring home a frightening revelation.
I think I almost got the data decrypted.
Whoa. I've never seen an Imperial fighter like that. Sabine, talk to me.
Looks like some new kind of TIE interceptor. But this one has shields.
But TIE fighters never had shields before.
Maybe that's why it's so secret.
If they're actually building these in numbers, our pilots won't stand a chance.
And neither will the rebellion.
As the rebellion grew more tenacious, Imperial forces grew more cunning in turn, and began adapting to rebel tactics. This new fighter initiative, the TIE Defender, was the brainchild of one Grand Admiral Thrawn, who by this point had his sights firmly trained on the fledgling Rebel Alliance, Phoenix Cell in particular. Thrawn was an anomaly in the Imperial system, a frighteningly competent commander who rose through the ranks on merit alone, even in spite of the fact that he was an alien in the deeply xenophobic Imperial military. As Phoenix Squadron settled in on Atollon, Thrawn started to dog their every step, interrupting their operations as much as possible while learning their methods and slowly narrowing down the location of their base. And yet, even as Imperial pressure mounted, the Alliance grew. Ship by ship, gun by gun, pilot by pilot, through countless setbacks, the insurgency gained strength, allies, and notoriety. With every victory, big and small, the Empire's once ironclad authority was undermined. With every life saved, the rebellion gained another supporter. The more that the Emperor tried to tighten his grip on his wayward star systems, the more the Empire found their jackboots being swept out from under them. What had started only 2 decades prior as the hushed whispers of a few disgruntled senators and the seditious plans of a few scattered insurgents was finally ready to blossom into a full-fledged galactic revolution.
This is Senator Mon Mothma. I've been called a traitor for speaking out against a corrupt galactic senate, a senate manipulated by the sinister tactics of the Emperor. For too long, I've watched the heavy hand of the Empire strangle our liberties, stifling our freedoms in the name of ensuring our safety. No longer, despite Imperial threats, despite the Emperor himself, I have no fear as I take new action. For I am not alone. Beginning today, we stand together as allies. I hereby resign from the Senate to fight for you, not from the distant halls of politics, but from the front lines. We will not rest until we bring an end to the Empire, until we restore our republic. Are you with me?
Look! They came! Look how many there are.
This, my friends, this is our rebellion.
With the official formation of the Alliance to restore the Republic, a vast array of once underground rebel groups came out of hiding and rallied for the first time around a single banner. While the Imperial propaganda machine began working at full speed, condemning this treasonous new rebellion, Alliance leadership plotted and planned. With rebel cells now coordinating freely, the long-awaited attack on Lothal grew imminent. After many sleepless nights and restless days spent in strategy meetings, covert supply missions, and surgical raids, the Alliance was finally ready to make their first real move. Jan Dodona's Massassi group arrived at Atollon for a combined assault with Phoenix Squadron. Their target? Lothal's TIE Defender factory. By striking such a prominent military facility so publicly, the Rebel Alliance would show the galaxy what it was capable of. Or at least, that was the idea.
Formation Auric 1.
0 hour approached, the angular visage of star destroyers sliced apart the starry expanse, evoking the very daggers they were constructed to resemble. Doom, in the durasteel-clad fist of Imperial might, had come to the rebel base at Atollon. The Chimera reared its head, prepared to dispense green fire from its sadistic maw. But how could it have come to this? What did the rebellion do to bring about this grisly fate? As it turned out, a great deal. Plagued by infighting since before its inception, the operations of the rebellion in the lead-up to the Lothal campaign had become increasingly frantic and ill-coordinated. Though the potential for failure had always been there, it was swept under the rug and obscured by the giddy optimism of the newly formed alliance. Long gone were the days of Luthen Rael's secretive network striking from the shadows, replaced by mass volunteer cohorts openly fighting the Empire. As a result, untrained idealists filled the ranks of the rebellion, bringing with them neither operational tact nor military training. So it's no surprise that when a routine patrol on Atollon revealed an Imperial probe, the response wasn't immediate damage control and swift disposal. Instead, the rebels decided to convert it into a Trojan horse, arming it with a bomb to detonate upon rendezvous with its destroyer. However, while this removed the immediate threat of discovery, it narrowed Thrawn's search for the rebel base to the mere 94 planets that his probes had been dispatched to. At the same time, rebel agents within Imperial ranks were no longer acting as clandestinely as they believed. After another haphazardly executed mission by Phoenix Squadron, Thrawn managed to deduce Callus's identity as the rebel mole, unbeknownst to Callus himself. Continuing to operate as usual, he walked right into the Grand Admiral's trap, bringing him directly to the rebels' doorstep. Directly to Atollon. When the 7th Fleet arrived and bared their turbo lasers at the rebel ships in orbit, Phoenix Self found itself in a state of disorganized pandemonium, its leaders realizing far too late that they had played right into the Empire's hands. Deploying his Star Destroyers to cut off any attempted rebel departure, the Admiral dared the rebels to do anything. Desperate, they attempted an emergency escape, only to have multiple fleeing ships torn to shreds. With communications to the outside galaxy jammed and seemingly no hope for a breakout, the rebels were left with just one recourse: sacrifice. Goading his Imperial counterpart Admiral Constantine into breaking formation, Phoenix Commander Jun Sato paid the ultimate price, laying down his life and ship in order to allow the remaining rebel forces to retreat and fight another day. As the survivors of Atollon regrouped with the main rebel force at their new base on Yavin 4, Thrawn gloated at the defeat of his adversaries and the delay of their attack on Lothal. But how much of a victory was it really? Though most of Phoenix Squadron and much of Masasi Group was destroyed, all but one of the rebel leaders managed to escape, and their cause was only emboldened by the new knowledge of their limitations. The battle exemplified the true nature of the conflict and its principal actors. Though Grand Admiral Thrawn was held up in Imperial propaganda as a military genius, most of his success relied upon the incompetence and inexperience of his foes rather than his own innate prowess. To be sure, he was a gifted strategist and a fearsome tactician, but ultimately, what made him stand out above his peers as much as he did was their own sheer ineptitude. In a military structure built upon the principles of meritocracy, such as the kind found in the glory days of the Old Republic, promotions are based on creativity, capability, and adaptability. In such a system, Thrawn is nothing special. He is the standard. The only thing that really made him unique in the Empire was his analytical mind, something that should be commonplace for officers in a meritocratic system. But the Imperial system was built on rivalry and patronage, and so, when the veneer of power is prioritized over a real tactician's talent, the intelligent are often at the mercy of the ambitious. What gave Thrawn an edge was that he was both intelligent and ambitious, and knew how to leverage both to his advantage. Nonetheless, he was forced to play the same game as every other Imperial officer, and even if he was remarkably skilled at it, it hampered his ability to capitalize on his victories. The rebels, meanwhile, learned from their mistakes, became more aware of their security flaws, and eventually amassed the strength of arms needed to launch their long-awaited assault on Lothal. Though the initial attack failed, a second assault by the remaining survivors succeeded against all odds. Thrawn ended up missing in action, removed from the galactic chessboard and not to be seen again for a decade. At Mon Mothma's call, the Alliance was born. At Atollon, it was baptized by fire. But at Lothal, it came into its own as a potent, viable force that could stand against the Empire. It showed itself to be capable of liberating planets and holding them, giving the denizens of the galaxy the one thing the Empire had feared most since its inception: hope for something better. and that would not do. The Galactic Empire was built on fear, from fear. Its leaders were terrified of the collective power of its citizens, so they had to make them afraid in turn to keep them docile. The snake was perpetually eating its own tail in a tenuous balance, which was doomed to fall apart sooner or later. Whenever citizens committed a rebellious act, the Empire would crack down with terror. Each crackdown created more rebels and more rebellious acts, which only caused the Empire to clamp down harder, and so on. This couldn't last forever. Something would eventually have to give. Imperial brinkmanship would eventually have to reach a limit. And it did. Enter Project Stardust. Having started its development in secret at the behest of then-Chancellor Palpatine, Project Stardust began in earnest after the end of the Clone Wars. The project's goal was simple and brutal: to create a superweapon capable of destroying entire planets. It was to be the magnum opus of Imperial ideology, the final jewel in the Emperor's crown. Up to this point, the Empire had maintained a thin pretense of legitimacy by casting itself as merely a continuation of the Republic that preceded it. It was ostensibly ruled over by the same Senate with the same mandate from the people to govern, and this illusion had more or less maintained peace across the galaxy. But it was always meant to be temporary. The Senate had been made to cede most of its power to Palpatine even before the declaration of the New Order, and whatever mandate he may have inherited at the start of his reign had long since expired. Project Stardust was his solution to this problem. It was the perfection of the Tarkin Doctrine, rule by fear of Force rather than Force itself. It is no surprise, then, that Tarkin himself took a personal interest in the project's development. After more than 20 years of construction, disrupted by numerous setbacks, constant struggles for funding and control with other high-ranking officers, and several major security breaches, the weapon was finished. In the name of his Emperor, Tarkin took the helm and became master and commander of the ultimate power in the universe.
We call it the Death Star. There is no better name, and the day is coming soon when it will be unleashed. I've placed a weakness deep within the system, a flaw so small and powerful they will never find it. The reactor module, that's the key. That's the place I've laid my trap. It's well hidden and unstable. One blast to any part of it will destroy the entire station. You'll need the plans, the structural plans for the Death Star to find the reactor. I know there's a complete engineering archive in the data vault at the Citadel Tower on Scarif.
To the Imperial Senate, the destruction of Jedha City was explained away as a mining disaster. The Emperor was not yet prepared to reveal his Death Star to the public. When he did, he meant to shatter all resistance at once. Everything that the rebellion had fought to achieve, everything they had planned, everything they had hoped to do, would be unraveled by this one weapon. A single public demonstration of the sheer destructive power that it possessed to eliminate an entire planet would silence all other dissent. Although, ironically enough, it didn't even take that much to nearly break the Rebel Alliance.
We must scatter the fleet. We have no recourse but to surrender.
Are we really talking about disbanding something that we've worked so hard to create?
We can't just give in!
We joined an alliance, not a suicide pact.
We've only now managed to gather our forces.
If it's war you want, you'll fight alone.
If that's how it's going, why have an alliance at all?
If she's telling the truth, we need to act now!
Councillors, please.
It is simple.
The Empire has the means of mass destruction. The Rebellion does not.
If the Empire has this kind of power, what chance do we have?
What chance do we have? The question is what choice? Run, hide, plead for mercy, scatter your forces. You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission. The time to fight is now.
Yes.
Every moment you waste is another step closer to the ashes of Jeddah.
I say we fight. I say the rebellion is finished.
I'm sorry, Jim. Without the full support of the Council, the odds are too great.
With the shadow of the Death Star looming and Alliance leadership divided, the Rebellion found itself paralyzed, seemingly unable to act in the very moment where action needed to be swift and decisive. For some of the devoted veterans on Yavin, this would not do. Rejecting the Council's decision, a rogue group of rebels led by Cassian Andor, now a captain in Rebel intelligence, took matters into their own hands, commandeering a stolen Imperial cargo shuttle and heading to Scarif. They all knew what was about to happen, what they were about to do. It was always going to be a one-way trip. Even when they successfully infiltrated the Imperial base. Even when the entire Rebel fleet followed them into battle. Even when the planetary defenses were destroyed. Even when the day seemed to be won. In the end, the Death Star plans were the only thing that left the surface of Scarif intact. But at least now, they had a chance. Fleeing the chaos, a single Rebel corvette carried the hope of the galaxy's salvation, heralded by one Leia Organa, daughter of Bail Organa and a rising leader within the Alliance. When their escape was cut short by a pursuing Star Destroyer, Leia entrusted the plans, alongside a hidden message calling for her rescue, to 2 droid couriers, dispatching them to the surface of nearby Tatooine. There, they found themselves captured and sold to the family of a young moisture farmer and local flight enthusiast.
Okay, all right, fine, let's go.
Tell your uncle if he gets a translator, be sure it speaks Bachi.
Doesn't look like we have much of a choice, but I'll remind him.
The course of history can often seem predictable. The idea that certain events are inevitable can be very enticing to those examining them after they have already happened. But sometimes, history can turn on those improbable and seemingly insignificant events which no historian could ever predict. Luke Skywalker, this young farm boy from a desert planet in the middle of nowhere, would, through a chance encounter with 2 unassuming droids, go on to rewrite the fortunes of the Rebel Alliance, and change the course of history forever. Smuggling themselves off-world aboard the starfreighter Millennium Falcon, captained by the infamous Han Solo and his crew, this intrepid band made way to reunite the droids with their owner, and destiny. With the Death Star fully operational at last, the charade of the Imperial Senate was finally put to rest. Palpatine and his military cabal were prepared to emerge from the shadows and rule over the galaxy without restraint. And to mark the beginning of this new period, Tarkin aimed the Death Star at one of the earliest and most enduring cradles of the Rebellion, a wealthy and scenic world in the heart of the core, Alderaan.
Commence primary ignition.
This would be it. With the destruction of Alderaan, the Empire made its statement of intent to the galaxy, and the stakes for the Rebellion became abundantly clear. Victory or death. And all of it hinged on a smuggler and a farm boy, traveling through space to save a princess. Remarkably, with a bit of clever planning and 2 stolen sets of stormtrooper armor, Luke and Han made it to the detention block unharmed, from whence they fought their way back to the hangar and out of the Death Star. But their success was not purely the result of an ingenious scheme and immense prowess in combat. Realizing why they'd come, Tarkin and Vader had a tracker placed on the Falcon, then allowed Leia and her rescuers to flee, knowing that they would lead them straight to the hidden Rebel base at Yavin 4. As Rebel analysts got to work picking apart the data from the Death Star plans, the near impossibility of their task quickly became apparent. The battle station's one real weakness was hidden well by the turncoat engineer who had designed it, down the shaft of one seemingly innocuous auxiliary thermal exhaust port. One of 18, just 2 meters wide and ray-shielded, sitting at the end of a several-kilometer-long run down a tight trench, harassed the whole way by potential thousands of enemy fighters and anti-starfighter batteries on the station's surface. The Rebel Alliance could muster only 30 starfighters in response. Luthen Rael had a vision. He followed that vision past the point of no return, abandoning all bonds of morality in order to build a network of dissidents. Mon Mothma used her connections and personal fortune to turn this network into an alliance. Military leaders like General Dodonna and Commander Sato tempered the alliance into a viable fighting force. Daring and dangerous work by Phoenix Squadron and many other cells like it supplied munitions, manpower, and spacecraft to the fight. But for all their struggle and sacrifice, in the end, in this 11th hour, when the physical embodiment of Imperial oppression stood prepared to snuff out the flame of resistance, all the rebellion could offer up was 30 brave young pilots and 30 stolen, scavenged snub fighters, armed with nothing but a hope. This was all they had left after the battles of Lothal and Scarif. But it was fight or die, and the rebellion chose to fight.
Stand by alert. Death Star approaching. Estimated time to firing range, 15 minutes.
With the Death Star rapidly bearing down on the planet and only one chance at success, the Rebel attack was truly desperate. From inside the battle station, it would have looked like nothing more than the last dying gasp of the Alliance. As one attack run was foiled, and another, the already small Rebel force rapidly dwindled. With less than a minute left and no more room for error, Luke took the lead on the third and final trench run.
His computer's off. Luke, you switched off your targeting computer. What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm all right.
Rebel base in range.
You may fire when ready.
Have you not? What?
Yahoo!
Look out!
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
And once more, history turns.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
The destruction of the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin was the greatest and most potent victory that the Rebel Alliance had ever achieved. More than 20 years of planning and construction reduced to a debris field orbiting Yavin. With it, the rebellion also eliminated a sizable portion of Imperial military leadership, including Chief of the Imperial Navy Conan Antonio Modi, ISB Colonel Wolf Yularen, and even Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin himself. Beyond this, however, it also created an existential crisis for the Empire as a whole. The destruction of Alderaan had been meant as an announcement to the galaxy, displaying the absolute triumph of Imperial authority. Instead, the Battle of Yavin turned that announcement into one of dire chaos. Without the corpse of the Senate to maintain order or the Death Star to command it, the Empire could rely on neither the rule of law nor the rule of fear, and in absence of either law or fear, the Empire resorted to the one thing it had left: brute force. Though their greatest weapon was destroyed and many of their leaders dead, the Empire still maintained effective control of most of the galaxy, and did so with the most powerful military in recorded history. As shock soon turned to anger, the Empire set out to destroy the rebellion by whatever means necessary. Where once the odd insurgent uprising had been an almost welcome annoyance, allowing the Empire to routinely demonstrate their power to the galaxy, now these rebels had become a preeminent threat, and their annihilation the primary goal of the Imperial military. Within days, an Imperial fleet converged on Yavin 4, driving the rebels off the planet in a hasty evacuation. What followed was a long string of successful rebel attacks on high-value Imperial targets, raising morale yet further and drawing flocks of new volunteers to the rebel cause. Using this momentum, the Alliance planned a grand offensive in the Mid-Rim, eclipsing all they had performed thus far. With Imperial forces weakened, demoralized, and disorganized after Yavin, the rebels managed to gain and hold real, tangible territory for the first time since the Alliance's formation. But it was not to last. After nearly a year of constant fighting, the rebel fleet found itself vastly overstretched and unable to maintain their holdings. The Empire's moment of weakness had passed, and with renewed vigor, they began to push back hard. Though Yavin had been an incredible victory, the full military might of the Empire could only be resisted for so long. Whatever momentum the rebels had was gone, and now they could only retreat. So they would, giving up planet after planet in a coordinated withdrawal, until once more the rebellion was on the back foot, on the run, and regrouping at a hidden base deep in the Outer Rim. A small, isolated, frozen planet far from the centers of galactic civilization would be their sanctuary. Hoth. Selected by General Dodonna, this wintry wasteland emerged as the perfect location for a new rebel base. The system was obscure enough not to show up on most star charts, but close enough to major galactic trade routes, the rebel traffic could slip in and out undetected. The planet itself was also ringed by an asteroid field which helped interfere with Imperial scans of the region. So for 2 years, the Alliance worked to turn this barren place into a suitable home, constructing what would become Echo Base as a refuge for them to recover their forces and prepare their next move. It would be a second Yavin, a place where they could seek shelter and gather their strength without fear of Imperial reprisals. But even here in this remote place, the rebellion would find only temporary respite. Obsessed with finding the one who had destroyed the Death Star, Darth Vader had his fleet search tirelessly for the new rebel fortress, using probe droids as Thrawn had once done, all those years ago. When the base on Hoth was finally discovered, the Empire came down upon them in a furor.
What is it, General? My lord, the fleet has moved out of Lightspeed. Comscan has detected an energy field protecting an area of the 6th planet of the Hoth system. The field is strong enough to deflect any bombardment.
The rebels are alerted to our presence. Admiral Ozzel came out of Lightspeed too close to the system.
He felt surprise was wiser.
He is as clumsy as he is stupid. General, prepare your troops for a surface attack.
Yes, my lord.
The rebels had chosen the location of Echo Base wisely, and constructed its defenses yet wiser. A deflector shield was installed, more advanced than the one utilized on Atollon, and a tight network of anti-air defenses would dissuade Imperial pilots from attempting an aerial assault. On the ground, an elaborate network of trenches and emplaced anti-armor turrets stood ready to repel any attack from the vast ice plains stretched out before the base. Truly, the Alliance Engineering Corps had outdone themselves constructing the base and its fortifications. The Empire, on the other hand, had access to Blizzard Force, an elite cold-weather stormtrooper unit of the renowned 501st Legion. Commanded by General Maximilian Veers and overseen by Darth Vader himself, they would attempt a bold, if predictable, strategy. Landing several kilometers away on the other side of the desolate ice plateau, Blizzard Force would march right through the dense rebel defenses, relying on their sheer weight and force to sweep aside any obstacle.
Echo Station 3TA. Just spotted Imperial Walker.
For the Imperials, there was only one objective: to pin the rebels to this planet and crush them. After Veers destroyed the station's power generator, Vader would finish it by bombarding the transports and storming Echo Base. For the rebels, it was a matter of calculated withdrawal. Theoretically, the Alliance could have stood their ground and fought, trading each individual life for scores of Imperial ones in the process. But the value of Echo Base was lost the moment it was discovered. Its purpose, like that of the outposts on Atollon and Yavin before it, was not to be a fortress, but a staging ground. A light that was bright enough for wayward partisans to find, but dim enough not to be noticed by Imperial authorities. The rebellion's entire battle strategy hinged on buying time for everyone to leave. Victory, in this instance, would be counted in the number of lives saved, rather than soldiers slain or land taken. The Alliance had no intention to fight the Empire's fight. They would let Echo Base be destroyed so that the rebellion could go on. The Empire would proclaim the Battle of Hoth to be the worst battlefield defeat that the rebellion had ever suffered. Though they were able to fully evacuate the main component of their forces, the Alliance was forced to split up across various rendezvous points and rendered effectively unable to continue openly fighting the Empire for the first time since Scarif. To many Imperial troops, this total rout appeared to signify the end of the rebellion. Having chased them out of the Mid-Rim, and now their last major stronghold, it seemed as though they had struck a killing blow to the Alliance. Imperial propaganda certainly didn't do anything to challenge this narrative either. With the rebel fleet scattered and fleeing yet deeper into the Outer Rim, the Empire believed itself free to claim outright victory in the war. But while they gloated and celebrated, the rebellion was far from finished. Unlike the Empire, whose rigid structures of power could be bent and broken with relative ease, the Rebel Alliance was designed to resist such pressures. Their flexibility had served them well in the early years of the war, and now it would be their saving grace. Operating across vast distances with their forces split came as second nature to an organization that was formed from hundreds of disparate cells, all with their own aims and methods. Though they'd lost their base, they retained the bulk of their forces and their high command. As individual divisions of the fleet either succeeded or failed at escaping their Imperial pursuers and began to regroup, a plan was hatched. Using precision strikes across several planets, the Alliance would cripple the Empire's ability to service and construct new warships. They had learned from their mistakes of the preceding year. Sieges and pitched battles would never lean in their favor so long as the Empire could simply outproduce them militarily. This operation would be the first in a new campaign to regain their footing and show the galaxy that the revolution yet lived. But as the Rebel strike force at Sullust became bogged down in the exact kind of prolonged fight that they had intended to avoid, a new piece of intel fell into their laps, which would disrupt the whole offensive.
The Emperor's made a critical error and the time for our attack has come. The data brought to us by the Bothan spies pinpoint the exact location of the Emperor's new battle station. We also know that the weapon systems of this Death Star are not yet operational. With the Imperial fleet spread throughout the galaxy in a vain effort to engage us, it is relatively unprotected. But most important of all, we've learned that the Emperor himself is personally overseeing the final stages of the construction of this Death Star.
The Empire's leaders had never quite accepted the loss of the first Death Star. It had defined everything that their ideology was built upon, everything they held to be true. The construction of a second, therefore, was always going to be the Emperor's response to such a humiliation. It was an act of desperation by an autocrat with no better options left to his imagination. However, as the war dragged on and the rebels licked their wounds from Hoth, hubris sank its teeth into the aging Emperor. One final showdown. He would turn his weapon of last resort into a lure, leading the entire rebellion into the open maw of defeat, where he, as the bait, would willingly place himself. How could the rebels resist such a target? The Emperor Palpatine, ruler of the known galaxy, destroyer of the Republic, enslaver of 1,000,000 worlds, and architect of the New Order, would personally oversee the construction of this new battle station. The chance to destroy both the galaxy's dictator and his second superweapon in one fell swoop would be irresistible. It was a perfect inversion of Tarkin's plan at Yavin. Instead of finding the rebels, Palpatine would make the rebels come to him. This was what Imperial High Command had sought to do since the start. Their only effective method of warfare was direct, pitched battles where they could simply overwhelm a smaller and weaker opponent with their superior force and firepower. And at last, they would have their wish. Having deliberately leaked the location of the Death Star in a way that appeared to be a genuine security breach, the Alliance was made to feel as if they'd pulled off an intelligence coup. The plan was simple. Deploy a team to destroy the station's protective shield generator on the forest moon of Endor, and then have the Rebel fleet distract the seemingly dysfunctional Death Star, while snub fighters navigated its tight internal corridors. Upon finding the station's power generator, they would deliver an even more personal killing blow than the hair-splitting maneuver pulled off by Skywalker, and end the reign of the Empire once and for all. It was perfect.
All wings report in.
Red leader standing by.
Gray leader standing by.
Green leader standing by. Lock S-files and attack positions.
May the Force be with us.
We've got to be able to get some kind of a reading on that shield, up or down. Well, how could they be jamming us if they don't know if we're coming? Break off the attack. The shield is still up.
I get no reading. Are you sure?
Pull up! All craft, pull up!
Caught between the mailed fist of the Imperial Navy and a fully armed and operational battle station, the Rebel fleet found itself trapped and forced into a fight on the Emperor's terms, precisely as he had intended. Everything the rebellion had built up over the last 2 decades seemed as though it were about to be snuffed out in a single day. While Rebel Admiral G.L. Akbar rallied a desperate defense to protect their fleet, Han and Leia's strike team on the surface of Endor failed to deactivate the shield in time, and fell captive to a hidden Imperial garrison. Meanwhile, captured and brought before the Emperor in chains, Luke Skywalker was made to watch the apparent destruction of the Alliance and his friends, succumbing by the minute to rage and despair.
Come, boy. See for yourself. From here, you will witness the final destruction of the Alliance and the end of your insignificant rebellion.
As everything burned around them, the last remaining rebel leader with any hope for victory was Lando Calrissian, card player, gambler, and scoundrel turned rebel hero. A longtime friend to Solo and entrusted with the Millennium Falcon for the duration of the battle, he had faith that the newly minted general would carry the day. And that faith was not misplaced.
The shield is down. Commence attack on the Death Star's main reactor.
We're on our way. Red group, gold group, all fighters follow me. I told you they'd do it.
As the final drama of the old Jedi Order played out inside the Emperor's throne room, Calrissian, Wedge Antilles, and a handful of other brave pilots made their way through the Death Star's narrow tunnels, prepared to strike at the heart of Imperial tyranny and bring it to a fiery and permanent end.
Here goes nothing. Now lock onto the strongest power source. It should be the power generator.
Form up. Stay alert. We could run out of space real fast. There it is.
All right, Wedge. Go for the power regulator on the North Tower.
Copy, Gold Leader. I'm already on my way out.
In the immediate aftermath of the second Death Star's destruction and the Emperor's demise, the Alliance to Restore the Republic was reorganized as the New Republic. Finally legitimized, they could now challenge the until then absolute authority of the Empire with their own. The rebels had always acted as insurgents, fighting from below against an existing power structure. Now, having successfully undermined that structure, they would be tasked with establishing their own in its place, one that could keep the peace without resorting to imperial despotism. As planets across the galaxy flocked to the banner of the new Galactic Republic, the Empire began fracturing into numerous splinter cells, with Moffs, governors, and various military leaders each trying to claim their piece of the imperial carcass. This is perhaps the most fundamental flaw of authoritarianism. Without a central leader holding it all together, the system is bound to collapse. There are not, and cannot be, any inbuilt checks and balances, or effective contingencies to keep the government running without its autocrat. And no autocrat can live forever. What followed after Endor was a slow, arduous process of rooting out the remnants of imperial power, either destroying them or forcing them to heal. This campaign reached its culmination only a year later, in a great battle over the sandy desert world of Jakku. With nearly the entire Imperial fleet assembled and many of the Empire's remaining leaders present, Admiral Akbar saw an opportunity to end the war once and for all. Ordering all New Republic forces to the planet, Akbar swung the hammer of the newly consolidated and emboldened Republic Navy against the now outmatched Imperial forces. After 2 days of brutal, grinding combat and a final deadly round of Imperial intrigues and betrayals, it was over. The battle was won. The Empire was finished. In Histories of the Galaxy, the conflict that created the Empire is remembered as the Clone Wars. The conflict that ended it is remembered as the Galactic Civil War. In truth, both names are somewhat inaccurate. The Clone Wars was, in effect, a civil war, with the galaxy split in two as part of the Republic trying to break away and form its own government. The so-named Galactic Civil War, meanwhile, was really more akin to a galactic revolution. Rather than two opposing states fighting against one another for supremacy, this was a conflict of the people trying to overthrow their own despotic government. In looking back on this revolution, it is easy to feel as though its outcome was in some way inevitable. The gift of hindsight allows us to see and understand things that people of the past did not, or could not. To us, the many structural flaws inherent in the Imperial system seem apparent, and its eventual collapse can therefore appear to have only been a matter of time. But nothing is inevitable. While they are easy to wrap up in all kinds of romanticism, far from every revolution succeeds. The Separatist Uprising, for instance, although no less morally just than the Rebel Alliance, failed almost completely. This rebellion's ultimate triumph was not an outcome of predetermined fate. Historical determinism of this kind undermines both the immense magnitude of what they achieved and the monumental difficulty they faced in order to achieve it. Fate, destiny, doom, these are illusions we convince ourselves of, born of vanity and arrogance, fueled by the conceited notion that the universe naturally bends around our whims and our fortunes. Reality has shown time and time again that our lives are dictated as much by chance as they are by fate. In the end, this was Palpatine's great mistake. He allowed himself to believe that his rule was the fulfillment of destiny, and that all who opposed him were destined to fail. But just as his victory was not inevitable, neither was his downfall. The rebellion's success was the result of more than 20 years of painstaking, dangerous work by dedicated people willing to lay down their lives if need be for the cause. It was the result of countless small acts of heroism by a million nameless heroes, unfazed by the grueling effort it took to overcome seemingly unbeatable odds. Would the Empire still have fallen even if these particular rebels failed? Perhaps, but there is no telling when or how. It may be easy for us to sit here and pontificate about the many flaws of authoritarianism and the ways that dictators plant the seeds of their own destruction, but in all these retellings of events long past, we must never forget the immeasurable suffering inflicted on innumerable people living under Imperial rule. For every year that it went on, more innocents languished under the yoke of 10,000 petty autocrats. More planets became stripped of their resources to feed the Imperial machine's endless hunger. More species were enslaved or brought to the brink of extinction, and the dream of liberty grew ever more distant. So perhaps the Empire was doomed to fall, sooner or later, but for each passing day that its cruelty continued unabated, the wound at the center of the galaxy grew only deeper. The time to resist oppression and injustice, wherever it exists, is always now. There will never be a better moment than the present one. This resistance can take many forms, from the ideological to the physical, and while not all forms will be suited to all moments, it must be a resistance. Power concedes nothing without a demand. The longer it goes unchallenged, the more difficult it becomes to challenge it. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. So do not remain silent when faced with the erosion of your rights by those who wish nothing less than your total submission. Do not quietly surrender to the indignities and abuses imposed upon you by tyrants in the vain hope that they will one day be contented or satisfied. They cannot, and they will not. A hunger for power, much as a lust for violence, can never be sated. It must be quelled by force of arms, and such evil must never be allowed to return by those who remember. So let us dedicate ourselves to the ever-unfinished work of liberty, to protect it from those who would see it taken from us, and advance it for those who have yet to enjoy its plentiful gifts. Let us ensure that those who lived and fought before us shall not have died in vain, and that through their sacrifice we may celebrate a new birth of freedom across the galaxy. Hello and welcome everyone to the end of the video. If you've gotten this far, then you've been watching me in character, so to speak, for almost 2 hours. I made the conscious choice going into this project to present it as a narrative from an in-universe perspective. You can think of the narrator as a historian from long after the Empire fell, going back and examining the reasons for its collapse, and perhaps trying to find some lessons to offer the people of his day. I would not have been able to do any of this without the help of my good friend Wilson, who's worked with me every step of the way to bring this project to completion. There are entire paragraphs in the script that were mostly written by him, and he served as an incredible advisor and co-writer throughout this whole process. I couldn't thank him enough. I also have to shout out my other good friend Parkes Harman of the Artor YouTube channel. He's also served in an advisory role for this project from near the beginning, and he's just recently put out a video, not dissimilar from this one, all about the politics and themes of Rogue One. He's also working on a new video about Andor, which is supposed to come out at some point later in the year, and will probably make a great complement to both this video and his most recent one. If you enjoyed this, then you will undoubtedly enjoy what he has to offer, so a strong recommendation from me and many thanks for his contributions. Links to his channel and video in the description. There, you can also find links to my Discord server, my godforsaken Twitter account, and my new Patreon if you want to support me financially. YouTube is becoming more and more restrictive for content creators like myself, so I'm hoping that Patreon can eventually help me make this channel something that I can sustain myself on, and therefore devote more of my time to. Now, those of you who've been following me for some time will know that this video has taken me 2 entire years. I started writing it after the publication of my last video in May 2023, and now here we are in 2025. In that time, a lot has happened. The world has changed. I've changed. And my goals for this channel have changed too. For a long time, I was going to have my next project be some kind of a history video, something to reacquaint me with my usual stock and trade. But like I said, times have changed, and I don't really feel like a fun little history video meets the moment we're in. There's a lot of important things to say about what's happening around us right now, and I think a lot of it is being left unsaid. The next mainline video, and probably the next few after it, will be about that. About the unique, dark, dangerous moment we're living in, how we got here, and where we go from here. To that end, I'll be uploading another video relatively soon to give a more comprehensive update on the channel and my plans for it. There will also be a director's commentary livestream after this video is uploaded on YouTube, in which we'll take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of how this video was made and the many hurdles we faced making it. $5 patrons and above will be able to ask questions during the stream with guaranteed answers. With all that being said, thank you all for watching and for your unwavering support over these long 2 years. May the Force be with you, and until next time, goodbye and good luck. Sic Semper Tyrannis.